Well, good afternoon, everybody. Well, it's great to see such a good crowd. And I don't know whether it's the new location, which is certainly a lot cheerier and brighter than the old cage. And I think it's also perhaps our particular speaker and the fact that it's the beginning of the semester and all those things together. But it's great to welcome you all here, and in one of, if not the first, formal events in this particular room. So I hope you've noticed on the way in that the Learning Commons is in fact being well used. So we're real pleased about that. It's really my pleasure to welcome everybody to this first in the series for this year on the Provost Conversations for Teaching and Learning. And it's part of now our newly named Centre for Learning and Teaching. We kept it as CLT since we're all familiar with CLT, but just changing the words around a little bit. Because really what we want to do as part of our Student Success Initiative is to help the students to succeed by helping ourselves as faculty and the faculty administrators to succeed, and sharing some good ideas, sharing best practices, sharing some things that worked, maybe sharing occasionally some things that didn't work so well, so that we don't all sort of go and do the same thing again. So our topic today is inspiring learning. Which can be, depending where you put the emphasis, I'm sure it can be, inspiring learning or inspiring learning or
I'll leave it up to you, the provost.
Okay, all right. Yep. And our leader, of course, is well known to many of you, though perhaps not to all, C.J. Butler from the College of Education, the Darden College of Education. And C.J. is most of the time out at our Virginia Beach Higher Ed Center, but also teaches occasionally here on campus. And so he's one of the people we hear about in the radio, snarled up on 264 from time to time. He's a senior lecturer in the Communication Disorders and Special Ed Department, and has a Master of Science degree in Special Education from Old Dominion University, and has been an instructional specialist with the York County School Division, and an adjunct instructor in the Department of Early Childhood Speech and Language in Special Education here at ODU. CJ was named as the Distance Learning Faculty Member of the Year in 1999. And again, excuse me, most recently, in 2011, he received the Darden College of Education Award for Teaching Excellence. He's worked for a good length of time here at ODU, is well known and well loved by us all. He's worked in public and private systems. He's got experience. And despite all of that, he has enthusiasm, as you'll see. He has humor. Very good spirits, and we're really delighted that CJ is our kickoff person today. So welcome, CJ.
Thank you.
And over to you.
Thank you very much. You should really save that for the end when I'm done, because then it will decide whether it's worthy of that. Thank you so much, Dr. Simpson, who's been very much a support to me, and so when she asked, or when the request came for me to do this, I was more than glad to do it. I'd like to thank Dr. Abdu and especially Allison Shea, for those of you who don't know Allison with the CLT, and all the folks in CLT for their support in getting this off the ground. They make me look awfully good. So with that being said, they asked me, they said, CJ, motivation. You know, one of the problems that we have now, apparently, is that our kids, our students, and I call them kids because they're kids to me, they're not motivated. And I got to thinking about this over the last 10 years or so, and trying to figure out, okay, what has caused this disconnect from what we, I think, used to see to what we see now? And there's been a lot of questions about it, you know, critical thinking, problem solving, all this higher order stuff, but I really think it's simpler than that. I think it's much simpler than that. I think we're overthinking it, folks. We're still motivated by the same things that we've always been motivated by. Some of you came today because of the cookies, okay? Some of you came today because I don't know. And that's what I guess that's the question that we have to ask for each other, or answer for each other, is why do we do what we do? What I want to share with you, though, is something that I've learned. I started doing motivation scales with my students. And I've used the intrinsic motivation inventory. Some of you may have heard of it, Ryan's work back in the mid-'80s. And I'll be happy to share all this with you at some point if you're interested. I'm not a big theory guy. I'm more about, well, how does it look in the classroom? How does it work? So what I did was I took this inventory and I basically scaled it down. And I asked my students some random questions around specific activities to find out what do they find motivating, what do they find not motivating. And from the mouths of babes, right? They tell you pretty straight out what they find motivating and what they don't find motivating. What they find motivating are things that are engaging to them, things that are relevant, that they can put into practice. What they don't find motivating are things that they don't see any application for. So what we tried to do was build classes that did that. At least that's what I try to do. And so what I want to do today, if it's okay with you, is since this is a conversation, to ask you, what do you think motivation is in your students or for yourself? And we'll start with that. Allison's got a little handheld mic. Not a little handheld mic, it's a large mic. And so what I'd like to do is ask you your thoughts on motivation. Then I've got some stuff I'm going to share with you, and we'd like to kind of go from there. So I'd love to open it up. Your thoughts on what do you define, or how do you define motivation? And what do you see as the issues that you're encountering with students today? Oh, raise your hands, please, yes. And you will be recognized for good hand raising. Yes. Anybody? Thoughts? What is motivation? Andy.
Hi, CJ. Well, I think motivation partially comes from what's relevant to someone, you know. So I'm motivated by things that I'm encountering all the time, or in my work, things that I'm in a PhD program right now, and as I'm going through the process, I'm partially inspired. Part of the inspiration comes from the fact that everything that we're talking about is so relevant to what's going on in my day-to-day life, and I can apply it very specifically and immediately in my everyday life.
Absolutely. So relevance, and we're going to talk a little bit about relevance and you know, the attributes that deal with that at some point during our conversation today. So absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
I would say, as far as a definition of motivation, it's a desire to do something that's strong enough that you're going to expend some energy to actually do it. And as far as like my motivation for coming here is that I want to be an excellent teacher. I want to be a better teacher. And so that is what motivates me. As far as what I found to be sort of motivating my students, I feel like I'm competing with their smartphones and texting in the classroom.
Absolutely.
And so I feel that to motivate them to actually be interested in what I'm teaching and engaged is that it has to be more interesting to them. Part of it by being relevant. Sometimes it's funny, but definitely they can relate to what I'm talking about to their personal lives.
Absolutely. So actually that fits perfectly into the first slide. We have to do things different, folks. What we did years ago with students, we really have to change not so much what we teach, but how we engage with our students. Because you're absolutely right. We are interacting with a group of folks now that have information at their fingertip. Okay, they don't have to rely on us to deliver it. It'll come to them on Google, whatever mechanism they want, their iPhone or whatever. So, you know, there's been a lot of controversy. My area that I work in primarily is behavior management. And so for us, a lot of the discussion has been centered around, you know, why are kids' behavior problems so, you know, so much more intense now? And what I tell folks is it's not really that the behavior problems have become more intense. What's happened is the small problems have just become so numerous that it overwhelms us. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, but I really appreciate that point. Yes, ma'am? Did someone else have a comment? Yes, ma'am. Yes, you do have to speak into the mic so they can hear you through the camera.
All right. Well, one of the things that I found, especially with the younger generation students, motivation to them a lot of the times comes as, quote, entertainment. is the instructor, is the professor entertaining? Can they keep my attention for more than a span of 5 minutes? And I think it becomes entertaining when the instructor is passionate about their particular subject matter. It really comes across, and I think that's one of the things.
Boy, I really want to emphasize to you guys, students will often use the word entertaining, but what they mean is keep my interest. And the research around students and student learning really centers, there's been a tremendous amount of work done recently on student engagement. When your students are engaged, they're going to pay attention. They're going to be entertained, quote unquote, because they are, it is important to them, it's relevant, as Andy said, and they're going to be motivated to learn. Now, conversely, and unfortunately, the other side of the house occurs too. If we get stuck in doing the same things that we've always done, teaching the same way we've always taught. And one of the things that I will share with you, I started teaching at Old Dominion in 1995 as an adjunct back in the days, and some of you may remember those days when distance learning was first really becoming an entity. And I taught in one of the first cohorts out of the education building. We had to put everything on blue paper, put it on an overhead. We had an overhead camera that shot straight down, and then you had a camera that shot you. Now, for those of you who know me, you know I do not stand still. So the techs were having a fit with me, and it was really a big problem because I'd have my blue papers and they would fall on the floor, and here and I was thinking to myself, I look like a boob up here, okay? And yet the feedback from my students was, wow, we get it. We get it. And part of it was because while I had all the theory that you could ever want, I can spout it off chapter and verse. What I really started doing was taking what you learn and putting it into practice. And so I started helping my students by saying, okay, this is what it says. This is how it looks. And it made all the difference in the world for my interactions with them. And so your point about entertainment, again, I think that's a word that we use, but really what they're saying is engaged, that I'm engaged in my ability to learn. Let's talk about motivation. Plain and simple, it's the desire to learn something, to do something, to change your behavior. And that's what we're talking about, really. We're not talking about doing the same things over and over again. We're talking about expanding or extending what we do. So for most of us, we'd like to think that there's this internal drive, that there's this intrinsic desire. But let's not kid ourselves. The vast majority of us are really motivated by an extrinsic motivation also. I'll be honest with you. I was having a conversation just the other day with one of my colleagues, and they said, well, CJ, you're good at what you do because you're driven to do that. And I said, yeah, maybe. But you know what? It started with people telling me I was pretty good at it. And I still remember that. I still hear that in the back of my mind. So there's still some extrinsic need for me. It's really, take it upon yourselves. You get up every day, you come to work, you work hard, and you do it because you're driven to do your best. But it sure feels good when somebody says, man, you're doing a great job. I watched you teach the other day, and wow, I was shocked at how your students were engaged, things were going. We turn that inward, and that's what motivates us. And so for me, I don't kid anybody. I tell everybody, anybody who'll listen, I'm an attention seeker, okay? So when you applaud, you just fueled the fire, man. Yeah, there you go. I might not ever stop talking. The provost has got to leave. The president's got another meeting to go to, but that's not going to stop me. They can go. As long as Carter runs that camera, and even if it runs out of film, I'll keep talking. But the point is, for our students, and for many of us, we struggle with our kids, and we say they're not motivated. They are motivated, just not to do what we want them to. They're very motivated. And that's the point. We got to tap into that motivation. We got to tap into that strength that they have and bring it back to the classroom. And we can do it. We know how to do it. Okay? And we know what works. We just got to put it in practice. And that's where the folks that I've learned so much from, and I don't want to embarrass Dr. Williams, but Dr. Williams was one of my teachers. And I tell people all the time, I've had great models. Man, I've had some great models to learn from. And, you know, they're the ones that taught me to do what I do. So, with that being said, there are some myths that I want to dispel just kind of quickly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because I think that they speak for themselves. But, you know, some people think that me trying to change your response model is coercive. It's not. It's not. It's what we should be trying to do. We should be trying to improve responses in our students, okay? And when we talk about responses, it's really pretty simple. It's changing how they think, how they respond. And so we have a responsibility to do that. There's nothing coercive about it. And it's based on some pretty simple principles. Why do you do what you do? Because it's reinforcing to you. Why do you not do it? Well, because either it's not reinforcing or in some instances it may be punishing. It's not rocket science, folks. You know, I've read lots of books on what motivates people and where it comes from. And really it all comes back to the same place. It's very basic. We do what we do for a reason. We repeat it because it's reinforced. Okay, it's not rocket science. The use of reinforcement is a form of bribery. I love this. Bribery is an illegal act, okay? What we do in the classroom is not illegal. What we do in the classroom is reinforce the behaviors that we want. And I'll share with you some of the things that I do because, you know, I get from time to time from folks, well, you know, CJ, what you do for elementary age students is different than what you do for college age students. Really? Let me share with you what I do and you tell me if it's different. When my students who are at 400 level, 500 level classes answer questions correctly, they get a big star on the screen and it flashes and it tells them how smart they are. We actually had a grad student a couple of years ago did a study across 3 of my classes, and what they found was the students that got the stars answered more questions. And people said, well, naturally, they're just blabbermouths. No, it's all about tying into changing their responses. If any of you teach on distance classes, you know how hard it is to get people to talk. So for me, it's just getting them engaged. Sometimes they give really off-the-wall answers. You ever had that? And I've been accused of, I tell them that I'll accept any answer, but my students tell me that that's not necessarily true because they say, you make the face, CJ. And I say, what do you mean? And they'll scrunch up and they go, you do this. And I said, because it's really painful when somebody says something that is so, but I laugh about that. It's not bribery. It's what we all do. Very interesting. I prepare teachers, and you know, they get fed a lot of this stuff about internal motivation and the power of the internal drive. I don't want you to lose sight of the fact that we all do this, again, for some external reason. For some, it's a paycheck. I mean, really, seriously. Let's get to the basics. And you know, when I talk to other folks, they'll say, well, that's not the same thing, is it, CJ? Yeah, it is. So it's not a form of bribery. It's not immoral. What you're doing is you're doing the right thing for your students. Another myth. They'll only learn to behave for reinforcement. Well, they'll only learn to respond appropriately because they're praised. Well, guess what? How do you think you learned your math facts? You learn through reinforcement. And that's the correct behavior. And if the only reason you give me the correct answer is because I give you a big star, I'll take it. I'll take it, because that's where you are right now. And so for me, we have to understand the basics of change. And so when people say this, now there is a problem with this, and what is it? What is the problem with this, with only learning for reinforcement and for the sake of reinforcement? They expect it for everything. Yes, sir. What are you going to say? How many of you, have any of you ever heard of a fellow named Alfie Kohn, or Kahn, however you want to pronounce it, K-O-H-N? He wrote a book called Punished by Rewards. It's a very powerful and provocative piece of literature. But what he talked about was what we refer to as non-contingent reinforcement. And we see this a lot. You guys probably see this a lot. You may even see people practicing. I like the way everybody's paying attention. You ever see that? Mm-hmm. Now, for you guys, I know you're attending because you fake it very well. In the classroom, teachers will do that to try to encourage kids who aren't attending to attend. Well, see, that's the wrong theory. If I want Elle to attend and she's reading her book, Lisa sitting next to her, I might go to Lisa and say, I really like the way you're paying attention, Lisa. Great job. You just earned whatever, a big star, whatever, a praise. Now, Elle wants that. Elle's going to say, well, I'm attending too. Now you're attending. Great. In other words, use what works. Reinforcement works. So the caution here is not to use non-contingent reinforcement. And by that I mean they have to earn it. They have to do something. They have to answer a question. They have to go on that speaker, whatever it takes. Okay? Students should work for intrinsic reinforcement. Well, that's the goal, isn't it? That we're internally driven to do our best and that our best is always going to be a fine product. But the reality is, how many of you, is there anyone in here that's a good singer? Now, you know what? I'm going to have to assume she must be a wonderful singer and have an excellent voice, because the next logical thing that I would do would be what? Stand up, give her the mic, and let's hear a little something from Pirates of Penzance. I don't know
I always
liked that. No, I'm just teasing. I'm teasing. I would never do that. She's blushing. Are you in the music department? No, I'm just teasing. But no, the reality is, for someone to raise their hand on that question, that should be an eye-opener for all of us as educators. She's what? She's intrinsically motivated. Someone has told her, and by the way, you've probably been told a number of times you have a beautiful voice, right? You didn't just wake up one morning and decide you did, right? Because if you did that, you'd probably be on American Idol. But anyway, the reality is we all begin our journey with external reinforcers, and then we turn it inward. It's like a great artist. You know, my niece, she can't draw at all. But we're trying really hard to encourage her because she has to try. And so we tell her, you know, you're doing a great job. Those stick figures, they really look like stick figures, you know, and you're talented. The reality is that I don't know that she'll ever be a great artist, but we're trying to give her the passion to do that. And that's where it comes from. It doesn't start, you don't think to yourself, hey, I'm really good at this, because then you risk not being good. You need that external starting point, okay? And my question here, how many of you would continue to work without an occasional paycheck? You know, we need that external motivation. Okay, this is an interesting one. The idea of fair and equal and the difference between the two. And this is very important when it comes to how we motivate kids. And again, I apologize if using the term kids offends anybody, but when you're old as I am, you become senior lecturer. It has nothing to do with my rank, it's my age, okay? And the reality is, I've learned over time that our students need different things from us, okay? They need different things from me. And so my effort has always been to try and treat my students in the manner in which they need to be treated to be successful. And part of this comes from my background in special education. I started out as a general ed teacher. As I suggested, Dr. Williams was one of my teachers. I graduated from Old Dominion back in and I'm not going to say it, Dr. Williams, but it was a while back. And I was licensed in PE, driver's ed, and mathematics. And started out teaching at a middle school and coaching baseball, and I thought that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Little did I know that at that time you could take 2 classes in special ed to be endorsed in special ed. So I ended up teaching in special ed, and I came back and got my master's here, worked under the guidance of some of the best teachers I'd ever met, Dr. Bob Gable being one of my mentors, who really taught me an awful lot about teaching. But what I learned in that experience was that you can't treat everyone the same. And when people say that, it really does kind of disregard the differences among us. And we do have them. I mean, it's like if I were running a fair race against Carl Lewis, very fast man, I'd have to start about 10 yards from the finish line. Because, you know, I know this used to be a temple of athleticism, but it's no longer that. And if I ran a race that I started at the same place as Carl, he'd beat me to death, and I wouldn't run very, very often. But by making it fair for me, I can gradually begin to do things that, and improve my skills. Treating kids the way they need to be treated to be successful is what it's all about. Now, granted, we have to have standards. Okay, we have grading scales, and we have things that are very, very important that we maintain standards. I have a lot of controversy with colleagues about the fact that, grading scales and things of that nature. I'm a big believer in having standards. But what I also believe is that, we can accommodate our learners without changing those standards. Okay, and that's something that each one of us has to deal with as educators. So how does this all fit together? Well, pretty simple. A controlling reward. I'll give you $5 for every A. Does that work? Absolutely. Don't kid yourself. It works. Now, the problem here is if that's all you do, if you never move from that, then the student obviously, or the child obviously, becomes controlled by the reward. And that's what we try to avoid. As long as she pays, I'll study. As long as I'm getting that $5, I'll work. A more intrinsic model. Your grades were great. Let's celebrate by going out for dinner. The student's response, I love doing well because I like spending time, or I like the fact that my mom or dad sees what I'm doing. That is higher order, and it's an evolution. Okay? It may have started with, I'll give you $5 for an A, and then it evolves into the student finding the joy of doing things for the reasons that we all want them to, that internal drive. Okay? So, as I told you, I can pull together research if you'd like, and I can spout it off for you. Here's some questions that some of the researchers have put out to us. Can you have in-depth learning without motivation? What do you think? Can you have in-depth learning without motivation? From your own experience? No? I throw this out because there are people who argue that you can learn the facts, you can learn the peripheral information without having any real motivation. But to really go deeper than what the basics call for, you've got to be driven to do that because it's not always in front of you. You have to go find it. And when you're put in the position of having to go and find the information, then that's where motivation really kicks in and takes over, right? It's really interesting. Andy brought up relevance. A lot of our students do not see the relevance of what we're teaching them, especially right now. And it's because they're not having to put it into practice. Once they get into a situation where they're having to apply what they've learned, then they're probably going to come back to you and appreciate much more fully what you've given to them. But it really is an interesting, it's kind of almost like a need to know. I need to know this now because I'm going to do something with it. And they may or may not see that in what we're offering. I can't tell you how many students come into my office and they say, CJ, I want to work with kids with disabilities. I don't know why I need to know algebra. And I'm like, because you've got to be able to teach it to your students. I don't know why I have to, and it's always that question, I don't know why. And so what we have to try and do is tie it back to what is their goal. If you want to be a teacher, you need to do certain things. And and I'm no different than anyone else. I mean, I question some of the things that I had to do when I was in my undergrad. I think that's natural. And that's part, and see, that to me is motivation. When you're asking the questions, that's motivation. All right, let's talk. Punishment work? Oh, I like that. I do that in class too, by the way. Does punishment work? Yes or no? Sometimes. There we go. That's a nice balanced answer. Sometimes. It depends. That's another one. It depends. Sometimes. Punishment works. Punishment works. The problem with punishment is it doesn't have a lot of residual effect. It doesn't have a lot of long-term effect. It has an immediate effect. Sit up! That'll get your attention. But after that initial impact wears off, what happens? We revert back to the behaviors that we exhibit unless we get taught something different. So that's where reward becomes so critical. Reward is the way in which we teach things. And we've tried to use all kinds of strategies to try and motivate kids, one of which is grades. Grades in school, for many of us, we think, okay, that's it. Okay, we're going to offer the grades, and the grades are going to be what motivates the student. Well, have any of you ever worked with kids that are gifted, truly gifted and talented? Okay, not just the kids that make good grades. I'm talking about the kids that are gifted. They could care less about grades. They really don't care about grades. What do they care about? Learning, the material. They want to know, this is valuable to me. They don't really care about the grade. I tease about this all the time. I had a student years ago, when I was teaching a first grade class, and we were learning about the world around us. And we were talking about the environment, and I said, the sky is blue. Well, naturally, he raised his hand and said, why is the sky blue? I said, because that's the color it is in the book. What do you think? You know, and so he and I went on a journey. At that time, we used these books called encyclopedias. Do any of you remember those? Okay, and we actually looked up, you know, what caused this phenomena that we see in the sky to be blue. And we learned about that. And what I came to find, what I learned very quickly about this young man was he could care less about the facts. He wanted to know the depth, the detail. Why? And so we had to give him little ticket stubs. He could ask 5 why questions a day because we had to limit his giftedness, all right? Because that's the way he was wired. I learned an awful lot about working with kids when I worked with him. The other place that I learned probably the most about teaching was preschool. Have any of you ever taught preschool? No? You have? Sunday school. Well, that counts. That counts. If you really want to see your ability to teach, go try and teach 4-year-olds. Because they will do anything. They're so much fun. You can go into a group of 4-year-olds and say, what is photosynthesis? Oh, I know. You take a camera, they didn't even mention plants, okay? They don't care. They're motivated because they're not afraid. They have no fear of failure. You talk about fear of falling. They have no fear of failure. Now, you can really test this. Go into a 3rd grade class and ask that same question. If they don't know what photosynthesis is, what do you get? You just did it. Eyes down. Eyes down. My favorite thing with my students on television when I ask them a question, especially one that causes them to think, they'll break eye contact. I call it disconnecting eyes. They disconnect eyes and awkward silence. And I say that. I'll say, I'll ask a question and I'll say, awkward silence, disconnected eyes, and they start laughing. They know what that means. The fear of failure is so powerful for them. They're scared to even try. And I tell them, I say, guys, all you got to do is give me something. And even if it's the craziest thing you've ever said or I've ever heard, I'll make a face and then I'll give you a star. Because I want you to know that's what I want. I want you to participate. I want you engaged. One of the things that I look at really very closely is this whole effect of Skinner. Some of you maybe don't embrace BF. I do, because I truly believe that we're all driven by very, very simple elements. And so, when Cone said we're a society of loyal Skinnerians, I take that as a compliment. Because I really do understand that for most of us here, we're here because we benefit from, in some way, whether it's the knowledge that we gain, the interactions, the cookies, we benefit in some way from being here. And that's what Skinner basically said to us. Couple of just quick things. It's interesting. If you've ever read any of the literature on learners, 80% of the kids that we work with learn in spite of us. Okay? They learn in many cases on their own. They're very deeply committed to their learning. But only a very small group of them are really motivated by good grades. Now, you start getting into competitive programs, that's a little different. But the vast majority of students are driven by other things, and it really has come to my attention. I do surveys with my students. I ask them, what motivates you? And I've got a whole pile of stuff just from my last couple of classes of things that students have said. You know, what they're motivated by, what they're not motivated by. And I ask them, I say, do you share this with your other teachers? And they said, well, not really, they don't ask. And so, you know, it's important that we as educators recognize that if we want to motivate our students, we need to find out what they crave and try as best we can to build it in. Now, I will tell you right up front, the coursework that I teach is teacher prep, NCATE, SACS, all that stuff, right? We have to show and demonstrate competence. So there's some things that I do that are probably not real motivating for students, like tests. And people say, well, you know, can't you demonstrate competence in other ways? Well, yes and no. You got to know what reinforcement is. You got to know what punishment is. You can't just be guessing about it. And it's not enough just to get up and role play it. So there's certain things that you have to be able to do. And I understand that those are not as motivating as maybe a group project or some kind of an activity. But we have to recognize that, you know, our students are really seeking out information from us. And that's what I try to keep in mind. I put this on here because I think it's important to recognize. And by the way, I've got this presentation, so you don't have to worry about writing stuff down. And Allison is, I'm sure, going to be available to, we'll send it out to anybody who wants it. So just either drop me an email or CLT an email. And I believe this is going to be on CLT's website? Yes. Yes, it is. Okay, so it's all available to you. And it's not, this isn't rocket science. I mean, I thought, if I know it, it's pretty much common knowledge. Rewards and punishment, okay? From time to time, when they're overused, they tend to undermine the intrinsic movement towards intrinsic motivation, right? I mean, if you're constantly looking for that external motivator, then you're less likely to move and turn things inward. We recognize that. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to balance it. We need to balance it. We need to recognize that initially, we offer rewards that make it valuable for the student, and then we gradually begin to take that away. My students, I enjoy doing things with them. I role play a lot of times with them. They'll raise their hand to answer a question, and I did that with you guys today. Good hand raising. Why would I do that? That's you know, crazy. Why would you do that? Well, because I want you to understand that if I want you to raise your hand, you have to know that's what I want. I get teachers all the time who say to me, CJ, I don't really want my students to raise their hand all the time, but sometime I do. So when you're teaching it, you have to teach them the most intense behavior, which is raising your hand and waiting to be called on. Then if I don't need it, I can always back off of it. It's easier to back down off of a requirement than it is to build up to it. And so I teach my teachers that. And we're going to do a little activity in just a moment. That parallels right here in interest. And unfortunately, you don't have a table, but I want to do something with you that I think speaks to this. How many of you have ever heard of a little finger game called Chisholm Bop? It's a math game. None of you? Really? Okay. It's really interesting because it's been around forever, and many people don't know about it. But I want to teach it to you, okay? You want to learn? It's fun. It's multiplying with your hands. Okay? Now, it's not the nines. You know the nines, right? You don't know the nines either? Nines. 9 times 5, you count down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Leave this down. 45 is your answer. It's magic. But anyway, Chisholm Bop is a little multiplication game. Now, the reason I'm going to do this with you is not to frustrate you, but to parallel this area of interest, and I'll get to it in just a moment. You ready? Put your hands in front of you and just put your thumbs pointing to each other and looking at them like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call out your fingers, wiggle them for me. Okay, you ready? Thumbs are your 6s, pointers are your 7s, middle fingers are your 8s, ring fingers are your 9s, and your pinkies are your 10s. Got it? There'll be a remedial class for the motor impaired. The end of our session. Okay, when you have a table, it's easier to see. So we're going to have to do this in the air. All right, you ready? Give me any combination 6 through 10. Give me any combination of 6 through 10. Somebody call out two numbers 6 through 10, for goodness sake. 7 and 8, very good. Pointer on one hand to the middle finger on the other. It doesn't matter which one. So it looks like this. I'm going to apologize for the glare. Okay? So it looks like this. Ready? Okay, here's all you do. The two touching, close them, and everything underneath. So it should look like this. Closed fingers are 10 each. Count them with me. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, right? 3 on one hand, 2 on the other. 3 times 2 is? 56 is your answer. 8 times 7. We'll do another one. Hold on, we'll do another one. But I saw some magic here. I saw the eyes kind of light up. I also saw that glazed over look. Okay, let's do another. Give me any combination.
4 and 5.
Can't 6 through 10. Did I do it? I made the face? 10 and 10. Okay, now 10 and 10, this is interesting because people always say to me, 10 and 10 doesn't work. Pinky to the pinky. Close the two touching and everything below. 10, 20, 30, 40, the two touching and everything below. So all 10 are closed, right? 10 times 10 is 100. And so the 10 is an interesting one because when you close the pinky, you have a 0. Okay, you ready? Here's the test. This is how I test my students. 6 times 6. Thumb to the thumb. Close them. No, close the two touching and everything below. So it's just the thumbs. That's 10, 20, right? 4 times 4. 20 plus 16 is? You haven't ever seen this, really? Let me tell you where this came from. I was teaching in a local school division that shall remain nameless. I'm teaching 4th grade inclusion, math. And I was certified so I could teach math, right? So I'm teaching math. And I got this little boy sitting there, and we're doing math facts. First week of school, we're doing math facts, and I'm seeing he's doing all this with his hand. What are you doing? He said, I'm multiplying. I said, really? Show me. So he pulls his hands out and shows me this little game. And I was like, y'all, the first one he showed me, I was like, what? The second one? Okay. By the third one, I said, okay, I see it now. I asked him, I said, where did you learn this? Who taught you this? I learned it myself. Well, see, they lie, okay? And I went, and you know, again, I went to that big book, encyclopedia, and I started looking up math tricks, math games, and sure enough, Chismbop appeared. C-H-I-S-M-B-O-P, 2 words. You can look it up online. There's lots of little tricks that people use. Now, do I have any math teachers in here? No? Okay. Math teachers, historically, I remember when I was in school, my math teacher would have told me, if she'd have seen me doing that, I'm going to cut those fingers off if I catch you doing it. But here's my thing. We want kids to get the right answer. How they get it is not as important. We want them to figure it out. This is not a prohibited prerequisite, right? So anyway, my point here is, over the course of the next few years, I taught this to every student that I came across. Now, some of my students would say, thanks very much, I'll just memorize them, okay? Appreciate it. Other students, you could see the light go on, and it finally made sense to them. And I don't think I ever really realized the impact until a few years ago. I was walking through the mall at Christmas time, and this young man was walking up the other side of the mall from me. And I was looking at him, I said, boy, he looks familiar. And he was looking at me the same way. So we got near each other, and he looks over and he goes, hey, Mr. Butler, 6 times 7. He didn't remember any of the social skills I had taught him, but he remembered that. Now, why does this come up in interest? See, if you didn't know your math facts, you'd have been real interested in that little trick. If you have somebody that is important to you that's learning their math facts, you're probably real interested in that little trick. But since most of you, I would say, what, 80, 85% of you know your math facts, it's not as big of an interest for you. And that's one of the things that you have to understand about teaching and learning, is if I can tap into something of interest for you. Now, for some of you, just the fun of doing it is enough. But if it really has value, if you were thinking, man, I can walk out of here and use this in my business or in my job, all of a sudden, that you're going to be much more motivated to use this little game, right? To use this trick, as I call it. Does that make sense? Okay. We know interest and motivation go hand in hand. Okay, I've got to stop in just a moment. So I think I'm going to get close to finishing. But I want to open it up to you guys so that we have time for questions and comments. I do think it's very important that we continue to emphasize the importance of cognitive interest and how we want to extend our students' learning. Just real quick here, these are some of the comments, you know, that relate to where kids are, where your learners are. You know, things just happened to me, or I'm so proud I did it. When you hear those comments, it gives you an idea of where they are and where they're finding their source of emphasis and control. Self-efficacy. So many of our students, especially in today's climate of accountability, they don't learn how to advocate for themselves, and so they really don't know how to ask the right questions, and they rely on us to more or less push everything at them. What I want you guys to recognize is how important it is to be persistent in your teaching. Outside of the college, when I teach teachers who prepare to become teachers in like grade school, elementary school, middle school, we talk about this relationship. We call it the resistance-persistence scales. Kids' resistance, your persistence. And unfortunately for us, as we try harder to put things in front of our students, their natural response is to resist it. You guys were great when I was teaching you that new little game. You all participated appropriately. Now some of you didn't use the right fingers. I saw some fingers going up. That wasn't what I asked for. But you were persistent. Okay, you stuck with it. You didn't resist me like a lot of your learners will do. What happens is, as their resistance rises, our persistence often drops. And what we have to do is balance that scale. We have to be as persistent as they are. We have to teach strategies. It's really important to teach strategies. How do you help your learners become strategic learners? This is, again, motivating to students. They find a way to make the connections that they need to make to be successful. These are just some of the things that I've come across in terms of, you know, can I intimidate you into doing good or doing better? Can I compare? This has really become something that we've moved away from, is comparing student performance. For years, do you guys remember when you were in school, did you ever have your grades posted on the bulletin board? You know, and for me, I was always fortunate. We had one kid in the class that I was smarter than, and so I was never at the bottom of the list. And I would always look at his paper when we would get him back, and I'd go, yeah, I'm still smarter than him. So, you know, but other than that, it really didn't do well for me. And you know, interestingly enough, for some kids, they fail on their own terms. You know, if I can't be the smartest, well, then I'll be the dumbest, and I'll be really the best, dumbest kid in here. It's not so much true. I think by the time kids get to college, they kind of figure it out. But, you know, it is different in the sense that I still think that many of the things that motivate our youngest learners motivate some of our older learners. So what are motivated students? Here are some characteristics for motivated students. And I think you see this in your students. And the vast majority of the students that you teach, more than likely, they demonstrate these things, right? These are the things that, and they stand out to us. Unmotivated? There you have it. They're not intrigued. They're easily distractible. Now, we have to be careful here because, again, remember what I said. They're unmotivated to do the things we want them to do. They're motivated. They're just not motivated to do what we want them to do. They want to do their own things. They want to be on Facebook. They want to be on Twitter. And and I got to tell you guys a quick story. In my class, I always have as a policy that, and this was a few years ago when phones were first becoming the rave, and I said to my students, you know, you cannot have your phone out, okay? You can put them on vibrate or whatever, you can't have phone out. So I'm teaching a behavior management class down at the beach, and there's this girl sitting there, and she's under the desk, and she's got her thumbs moving. I can see them because I can see in her hand, muscles in her arms moving, so I know she's doing something. She's looking down, and she's doing this. And I'm lecturing about, I don't know, reinforcement. Maybe it was punishment, I don't know. But I'm lecturing, and so I walked over and used proximity, and I got right near to her, and even got a little bit, you know, uncomfortable with the amount of body space I was violating. But anyway, I stood there, and she didn't even break a stride. She's just steady going. And I'm thinking to myself, she's got no clue. So finally, I mean, I have no choice here. I have to comment. I said, excuse me. We have an expectation in the classroom, no cell phones, no texting. She said, I'm not texting. I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm taking notes. I said, never mind. We live in a different age. We live in a different age. You know, and it's really interesting. I hate that computers have split screens now, too, because, see, my students are smart. They'll have Facebook on one side, my lecture on the other. And when I walk by, they go full screen here, and then when I walk away, I like these things to ponder, and I'm just going to leave them up for you to ponder. But what I'd like to close with, we have a few minutes before I know you have to get back to classes and other important things. I'd just like to open up for you guys your thoughts, your comments. This is a conversation after all, and I've been the one conversing. So please share. Any thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
I had a comment and then a question. I actually stumbled on something that served as sort of a positive reinforcement to get my students in the large lecture hall to participate, which is what I want them to do, and that was by learning their names.
Right.
I was surprised at how important that was to them, and what I realized is that as I, especially during the first week, started to call people by name, more and more students participated because they realized that that was how I learned their name, and they like to be called by their name.
Fantastic.
So that was really interesting.
And that actually comes from there's a whole very rich base of research around relationships, and we have to be very careful with that because oftentimes we misdefine that. But what you're describing, John Comer Model Schools, he really built everything in their program around the relationships that were established between teacher and student. And knowing a student's name, you don't have to know that much about them. Just knowing their name is very, very important. And so I absolutely agree. Excellent.
And then I had a question, and that is, I teach marketing, but I attempt to apply Vroom's theory of motivation to the classroom or how I run the classroom. Do you think that's an appropriate model to use?
Absolutely, and you know, one of the things that we do, and we have borrowed a lot from marketing in terms of what we know about reinforcement. How many of you in here, are any of you in here coupon clippers? Okay, I am. I'm a teacher. You know, I have to. But the reason I bring this up is because marketing is based on very, very simple behavior change principles. And if you understand those principles, so we borrow from them all the time. And I think to apply them to the classroom, absolutely. You know, using negative reinforcement, using positive reinforcement, using those models to encourage student participation. And you know, I mean, you got to understand that all of our students march to a different drummer. There are some students that all you got to do is say, you know, if we get these things done today, we'll get out 5 minutes early. I mean, they'll literally crawl on glass in some cases for that. Whereas other students, you know, you say that to them and they'll act like they're really excited about getting out early, but then what do? They stay back and talk to you, right? Okay, so what does that tell you? They're not escape. They're not, you know, they're not trying to avoid. They're more attention seekers, and you got to know your students because they're wired differently. Very good, great point. Other thoughts, anybody? No other thoughts, no other comments? Pretty good. We got about 3 minutes left, so you escape-motivated folks are going to be very pleased to... Oh, yeah, Andy, please. See, Andy's making y'all stay. But anyway, go ahead.
I just want to know, why is it called Chisholm Bop?
Chisholm Bop is what? I don't know. It's actually, it's a Chinese finger game. So that's where I guess the name comes from. I don't know. Maybe we could go on that journey together and look it up, okay? Any other thoughts? You know, this is interesting. This is an example of the differences in how we learn. Some of you are going to walk away and go, I didn't learn much today. Andy's going to say, I learned to multiply with my fingers. Neither of which were the main objectives for the day, okay? I do thank you for your time, your patience, your energy, and your attention. Have a great semester, a great year, and if I can be of any help, I'm not far away. I'm in the Child Studies Center over here right over here off campus. Okay? Thank you very much.